Before this video starts, I want to give a quick disclaimer that I am a huge fan of the MCU, so if my opinions seem very biased, it's because they are. With the release of the new DCEU film, The Suicide Squad, I think it's a very appropriate time to analyze the problems within this mess of a cinematic universe. Similar to the Star Wars cinematic universe, this is full of some really great hits and some really bad misses. The problems don't mean that the movies are completely terrible, they just need to be open to improvement. So let's take a look and see what makes the DC cinematic universe as controversial as it is and examine what can be done to fix it. In order to have a successful cinematic universe, the content at least needs to be good. Movies such as Batman v Superman, Justice League, Suicide Squad, and Wonder Woman 1984 are all clear examples of DC films that have been poorly received and deservedly so. From a filmmaking perspective, each one of these films fails at a certain aspect that makes it hard to watch. Wonder Woman 1984 has a severe lack of action that makes the movie drag too long. Batman v Superman has a disappointing third act with an anticlimactic final battle. The original Justice League was not the team-up movie that was hoped for, and Suicide Squad was a misleading ad campaign with not fully developed characters. DC has some of the most iconic comic book characters of all time, and so when they mess up, the problems become obvious, especially since comic book / superhero movies have become such a clear-cut genre that can become formulaic at times. It is helpful to follow that formula and branch out in order to have a unique film that stands out from the rest. Also, for the case of Batman v Superman, that movie came out the same year as Captain America: Civil War, which are both very similar in concept. In that situation, there is so much pressure for your movie to be better than the other one, or else it will be ripped more than it would be at another time. I could tell that there is so much ambition from the DCEU to want to succeed, but it's misses like these that make it difficult to reach. By having these chapters of the DCEU be so poorly received, it really tarnishes the brand as a whole. When the misses really miss, the track record deteriorates and the fanbase starts to dilute. Consistency is key. Fanbase loyalty grows when the content that they are consuming is consistently at the same great quality that they expect. With so many sporadic detrimental misses, the foundation for the fanbase cracks and they start dropping off with each new shakeup. The specific films this seems to apply to are Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, Justice League, and Wonder Woman, but more specifically the former three. What is essential to a cinematic universe is a connection between all of the content that eventually builds up into a larger collaborative event. In a metaphor sense, each film serves as a chapter to a book, and eventually all those chapters lead up to a grand climax. Man of Steel, Wonder Woman, and Batman v Superman were the chapters, with Justice League being the big finale chapter of sorts, but what an anticlimactic build-up. You can't rush a book. There needs to be a substantial amount of good quality films to come first before you could do your big team-up movie. These predecessor films are supposed to introduce your characters, build up their individual fan bases, and to explore how each one of them can function in a team setting. The DCEU just decided to skip all of that for half of the members of the Justice League, making the film be received way worse than it actually was. By skipping out on origin stories for Cyborg, Aquaman, and The Flash, it makes it much more difficult for audiences to be able to connect with them. Don't rely on audiences to do most of the work. It's a movie, not an assignment. You can't rush it. It is good to have chapters that branch off from the main story in order to give your audiences a break, but they should not drift so far away from the main timeline that loses the audience's interest. This means movies like Aquaman, Wonder Woman 1984, and Oscar-winning Suicide Squad. They all seem to be such side plot lines that don't add much to the overall whole of the DCEU, making them not necessary to watch. I will be honest, I have not watched Aquaman, but I am assuming that this is the case with that movie. Though with Wonder Woman 1984, this problem was prevalent. It felt like such a side mission that had no real stakes, not really any consequences. If you missed the movie but want to continue with the DCEU, then it is basically like you missed nothing. The movie is not terrible. There just is no real purpose to having it as part of the overall storyline of the DCEU besides being a moneymaker, which it was not. But yeah, not every movie needs to be connected significantly. There should just be reasoning as to why audiences should watch the movie. At least have there be some character development or characters that feel like they have a long-lasting, integral part to the cinematic universe. Speaking of non-integral storylines to the DCEU as a whole, there are a few DC movies that have come out recently that have been very well received, but for some reason just are not a part of the cinematic universe. Movies like Joker, Zack Snyder's Justice League, and the Dark Knight franchise have all proven to be very well received by most audiences and financial successes, kinda. I mean, they technically are connected to the DCEU because of the poor excuse of the multiverse that came out of nowhere, but if they want to go with that, then let them. Maybe this is another MCU versus DCEU moment like Batman v Superman and Civil War, but instead it's a battle of the multiverses with The Flash and Doctor Strange. But it sucks that these successful outside the franchise films that have done so well are not more incorporated into the main storyline, meaning that they are also unnecessary to watch for the DCEU, if you even consider them to be a part of it. It also sucks because they seem to be using the same characters from their current DCEU timeline but discarding those for new versions. For example, Jared Leto's Joker from Suicide Squad was one of the biggest draws for that movie and had so much potential to be a great interpretation of the character. Though after the movie came out, those hopes kind of fell flat and led really to nowhere. They almost abandoned the character as a whole besides a brief cameo in the Snyder Cut, but even then that movie is separated from the DCEU as well. But to replace Jared Leto, they brought in Joaquin Phoenix for his interpretation of the Joker character, and I personally did not like the movie, but I do have a lot of respect for his being one of the greatest versions of the Joker. But again, it doesn't matter to the DCEU as a whole, so why would I, as a general audience member, even care to watch that movie? I guess the point I'm trying to make is commit to a storyline and have faith in the cinematic universe you are building. There was so much potential at first, but years went by and it felt like the DCEU was already jumping ship from its original plan. This category kind of goes along with parts 1 and 3 about having a poor audience reception and non-integral storylines, but this is solid evidence of both of those. When the movie is not good or not necessary to watch, it is obviously going to have a smaller audience than what other related films would. A clear example of this problem in the MCU, to show less bias than I already have been, is Black Widow, a prequel film that did not add to the overall story of the MCU as a whole after the climactic juggernaut that was Avengers Endgame, especially since the lead character had already been deceased. I have already mentioned similar problems with Wonder Woman 1984, a side storyline that does not add virtually anything to the DCEU as a whole. With that, it is expected that the box office gross for both of those movies would be much lower than anticipated, and that is exactly what happened. The movies weren't flops, but they just were not financially as successful. Other DCEU films that weren't financially successful either were Birds of Prey and Shazam, which sucks because these two are my absolute favorite DC movies so far. If you haven't watched them, which clearly many of you haven't if you look at those box office numbers, please watch them because they are actually really good and highly underrated. These films are again not integral to the DC cinematic universe, which then warranted their lower box office numbers. Lower box office numbers also tarnish the DCEU brand as a whole and makes the studio question to keep investing in the franchise. The film in the DCEU franchise as a whole that probably is the most successful critically, financially, and storyline-wise is Wonder Woman. Honestly, I didn't like this movie either, but I would be doing a whole disservice if I denied its success. Wonder Woman manages to dodge all of the problems I previously mentioned with each of the other DCEU films. It was not poorly received by critics or audiences, and that is because of a great directing job by Patty Jenkins and memorable performances from Gal Gadot and Chris Pine. The movie did not need to have a build-up because it was an origin story for the character of Wonder Woman, and it was a good one at that. The storyline was integral to the DCEU as a whole because it introduced one of the major players in this franchise. The storyline was not separated or set in a different multiverse from the rest of the main stories, and a box office gross of $822 million is fantastic. It totally changed the game of the superhero genre and was an undeniable step forward for women in film, specifically the superhero genre. The running theme between the detrimental aspects to the DCEU seems to be poor filmmaking and storytelling as a whole. The movies have to be good in order to gain the success that is clearly wanted. The process cannot and should not be rushed at all, and continuity strengthens the fan base. There is so much room for growth for the DCEU, and I do hope that it gets better soon. I am hopeful with the direction it is headed because the new film The Suicide Squad seems to be an easy success, especially with James Gunn directing. I do get worried with the Batman or the Flash because they are multiverse storylines that seem to be rushed or eliminating Batfleck already. And I am also worried for Black Adam and Shazam Fury of the Gods because they seem to be such separate, non-integral films to the overall DCEU that might not garner much attention. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom seems fine though.